Hi, I'm Mallory Howard, Assistant Curator here at the Mark Twain House. Next to me, you'll see a photograph of the famous billiard room, where Sam Clemens, also known as Mark Twain, would try to get work done, but a lot of the time would get distracted. Can you blame him?
And I'm Jodi DeBruyne, Director of Collections here at the Mark Twain House. In our lecture today, we'll use photographs, objects, and archives from the Twain House collections to share stories about the Clemenses' lives here in Hartford. We'll talk about how they interacted with the city, their friends, and the clubs they were involved in, as well as why they ended up leaving. We'll also share some connections between our collection and Elmira.
After visiting Hartford for the first time in 1868 to meet with a publisher, Samuel Clemens noted, "Of all the beautiful towns it has been my fortune to see, this is the chief." The bustling and growing city struck a chord with the young author, and a few short years later, along with his new bride, Olivia Langdon, Livy, they started the long yet exciting process of building a home for their growing family. The Nook Farm neighborhood was an ideal location, a progressive and prominent literary community with residents whose reputations preceded them. People like Harriet Beecher Stowe, Charles Dudley Warner, and Isabella Beecher Hooker. In fact, thanks to Isabella, the Clemens family had a place to stay while their home was under construction. After buying several acres from neighbor Franklin Chamberlain on which to build, Sam was given a recommendation from another fellow Nook farmer, George Warner, for an architect. Edward Tuckerman Potter, known for his stunning church and cathedral designs, happened to be in the midst of building the Warners' home when Sam and Livy were searching for their own master architect. Warner wrote to his wife, Lily, asking for a hand-colored photograph of a New York townhouse he designed. Quote, "I wrote him, Potter, yesterday, to send it to you for the purpose of influencing the Clemenses about their house. I want immensely to get that house for Potter." His efforts were rewarded, and Potter was eventually commissioned by the Clemens family to build them the loveliest home that ever was.
Based on surviving letters, it is apparent that Livy was in charge of the design and layout of the home. In a letter to her husband in 1871, she reassures him, quote, "I think I have decided what we shall do about the building. I have decided, so you will not have to decide, dear heart. I have been drawing plans for our house." End quote. Sam and Livy were able to visit while it was in progress, and a workman remembered fondly a pregnant Livy hesitating to climb the stairs, and noted that, quote, "Without hesitation, Sam picked her up in his arms and gaily mounted the stairs, the pair laughing and chiding one another," end quote. When all was said and done, the home was 11,500 square feet with 25 rooms and acres of meadow. The Hartford Times said, quote, "It is one of the oddest buildings in the state ever designed for a dwelling, if not the whole country," end quote.
They would call this eccentric and intricate structure home for 17 years, the most productive and happy of his life. In the fall of 1874, the family moved in permanently. This charming home would hold within it the stories, adventures, and love of Sam, Livy, and their daughters, Susy, Clara, and Jean. When Clemens arrived in Hartford for that fateful publishing meeting, he was 32 years old. At the time, Hartford was one of the biggest publishing hubs in the nation. He had recently returned from a months-long boat excursion to Europe and the Holy Lands called the Quaker City, the first pleasure cruise. His job, however, was to write about what he experienced, what he saw, what he did, so that readers in the U.S. could get a sense of what it was like overseas. These were immensely popular, and those letters that the Alta California published were to be turned into a book. He reached an agreement with Elisha Bliss, head of the American Publishing Company, to do just that. This book became the bestseller during his lifetime, Innocence Abroad. While in Hartford, Sam would lease the home of John and Isabella Beecher Hooker. Isabella was the sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe and a prominent advocate for women's suffrage. Their house was perched on the edge of the city in an idyllic community named Nook Farm. The name came from the bend or nook in the river adjacent to the neighborhood. This prosperous and progressive community was filled with writers, actors, and activists. Beauty was something Sam had become very familiar with. He had fallen for Olivia Langdon, whom he had met the previous winter in Elmira, New York. The Langdons had connections with Hartford of their own. Their pastor was none other than Thomas Beecher, the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe and Isabella Beecher Hooker. The new couple made fast friends with the residents of Nook Farm, as well as other notables in the city, including Reverend Joseph Twitchell, who became a close and beloved friend to the family. Sam once noted, quote, "Making friends in Yankee Land is a slow, slow business, but they are friends worth having when they are made." End quote. After concluding business of the mind and heart, publishing Innocence Abroad and marrying Olivia Langdon, Sam put roots down in Hartford and called it his own. Hartford was ideally located, halfway between New York City and Boston. It was a center of manufacturing and industry. Sam even noted, quote, "A city whose fame as an insurance center has extended to all lands and given us the name of being a quadruple band of brothers, working sweetly hand in hand. The Colts Arm Company, making the destruction of our race easy and convenient, our life insurance citizens paying for the victims when they pass away, Mr. Batterson perpetuating their memory with his stately monuments, and our fire insurance companies taking care of their hereafter." End quote. Insurance was the mainstay of Hartford industry, with companies including Aetna, the Hartford Fire Insurance Company, Hartford Steam Boiler, and Travelers. The city was also known for publishing the Colt Arms Factory, Pratt & Whitney, and other such giants of manufacturing in the late 19th century. Sam commented, quote, "This, Hartford, is the center of Connecticut wealth. Hartford dollars have a place in half the great moneyed enterprises of the Union. All those Phoenix and Charter Oak insurance companies, whose gorgeous chromolithograph show cards it has been my delight to study in faraway cities, are located here." When Sam first arrived in Hartford, he noted, quote, "They have the broadest streets, straightest streets in Hartford that ever led a sinner to destruction." End quote. In order to pay for those sins, the Clemens family attended, though not regularly, Asylum Hill Congregational Church, where dear friend Joe Twitchell was reverend. Sam and Livy first met him when they were walking down the street past the church and noticed that the churchgoers were dressed particularly well and seemed to be of upper-class means. Sam decided to quip, "This must be the Church of the Holy Speculators." It certainly caught the attention of Reverend Twitchell, and the two started a conversation. That began a lifelong friendship. Nook Farm was a hive of activity, with dinner parties, thought-provoking clubs, riveting discussion, and other types of intellectual stimulation. Harriet Beecher Stowe and her husband Calvin moved into their home a year before the Clemens family. Stowe was a good friend of the family's and entertained guests at dinner parties with stories involving the anti-slavery movement, of which she was a huge part, penning Uncle Tom's Cabin, which made her the best-selling author of the 19th century. One day in particular, Sam was going to pay a visit to Mrs. Stowe and went over improperly dressed. He had forgotten his cravat. Livy was quite horrified at this faux pas, and Sam decided to pen a note to Mrs. Stowe apologizing. He included the note and a cravat on a silver platter and had it brought over to Mrs. Stowe's house by their butler, George Griffin. Mrs. Stowe decided to write Mr. Clemens back and told him, "Mr. Clemens, you have found a way that men can visit in installments."
William Gillette was only 20 years of age when the family moved into their new home on Farmington Avenue. Although his parents mostly disapproved, Gillette decided to become a thespian, and Clemens was one who encouraged his craft. In New York, one of his first roles was in The Gilded Age. He later became famous for bringing the role of Sherlock Holmes to the stage, giving him his signature look.
Charles Dudley Warner was most well known for being one of the editors at the Hartford Courant, which has the distinct honor of being the oldest continuously published newspaper in the United States. By the 1870s, Warner left the Courant and decided to pursue his own literary dreams, which commenced with My Summer in a Garden. He also co-wrote The Gilded Age with Sam, which began as a challenge from their wives. The two men were engaged in a dinner-time discussion where they criticized the state of modern novels. Their wives dared them to come up with something better, and they decided that is just what they would do. His wife, Susan Warner, was a great talent herself, an accomplished pianist who co-founded the Hartford Art School in 1877 with Livy, Elizabeth Colt, and Harriet Beecher Stowe. There was no doubt that Livy was in charge of running a quite chaotic household. She had numerous servants under her charge, as well as 3 growing daughters, and of course a husband who could also prove hard to wrangle at times. She handles her duties with grace, kindness, and patience. Livy understood that she was responsible for creating a space and type of home that exuded comfort, convenience, and elegance. She took this duty seriously, writing to her mother, quote, "I told Mr. Clemens the other day that in this day, women must be everything. They must keep up with all the current literature. They must know all about art. They must help in 1 or 2 benevolent societies. They must be perfect mothers. They must be perfect housekeepers and graceful, gracious hostesses. They must know how to give perfect dinners. They must go visit all the people in town where they live. They must be ready to receive their acquaintances, and above all, must make their house charming." End quote. Livy took on the daunting task of being the proper esteemed hostess that was expected of her. Whether guests were simply attending one of their dinner parties or spending a more significant amount of time, Livy wanted to make sure their comfort and ease were a top priority. Sam was often away from home on lecture tours, and he yearned to be with Livy and his daughters when he was away. He often wrote to his wife ruminating over what it would be like to reunite. In 1874, while in London, he wrote to her, quote, "Livy, my darling, I want you to be sure and remember to have in the bathroom, when I arrive, a bottle of Scotch whiskey, a lemon, and some crushed sugar, and a bottle of Angostura bitters. Ever since I have been in London, I have taken in a wine glass, what is called a cocktail, made with those ingredients. Before breakfast, before dinner, and just before going to bed. Now, my dear, if you will give the order to have those things put in the bathroom and left there till I come, there will be there when I arrive. Will you? I love to write about arriving. It seems as if it were to be tomorrow, and I love to picture myself ringing the bell at midnight, then a pause of a second or 2, then the turning of the bolt, and, who is it? Then ever so many kisses, then you and I in the bathroom, I drinking my cocktail and undressing, and you standing by, then to bed, and everything happy and jolly as it should be. I do love and honor you, my darling." I'm now standing in Sam and Livy's bedroom with the famous angel bed. They purchased it in Venice, Italy when they were traveling for quite a pretty penny, about $200 back then, which is the equivalent to $4,000 in today's money. To put it in perspective, their butler, George Griffin, made $360 a year, so it was quite an expensive purchase for them. The best thing about the bed, however, are the angels. They're removable on the posts. The girls, Susy, Clara, and Jean, loved to take these off. They would dress them in doll clothes, take them on carriage rides, even give them baths. A couple of them are a little discolored because they were extra clean. They were allowed to play with them as long as they returned to them to their proper place at the end of the night. When the girls were sick, they were also allowed to sleep in the angel bed because it would bring pleasant dreams, and it would probably make them feel a little bit better. Now, the odd thing you may have noticed about the bed is the setup. Couple theories for that. One, of course, is that people back then tended to sleep a little bit more upright, making it easier to breathe. Another is that due to the carvings, it would have been uncomfortable to sleep this way. But my favorite, and something that is a part of Twain folklore here at the house, is that Twain wanted to get his money's worth. So he purposely slept in it backwards with the pillows at the foot of the bed so he'd be able to enjoy the intricate carvings and get what he paid for. Besides caring for her family and her home, Livy also felt a responsibility to her community. She worked hand in hand with women like Elizabeth Colt and Harriet Beecher Stowe to promote the artwork and creativity of the women who resided in the city. Hartford established a place for the exhibition and sale of sculptures, paintings, wood carvings, lacework art, needlework, and decorative work done by women, and to encourage profitable industries among women. In the art sales report of the Committee of the Hartford Decorative School of Arts in 1883, they noted, Quote, "Women educated in all refinements of luxury who sought painting or embroidery merely as an amusement have been compelled to adopt it as one of their means of support. Will not our community further her in these efforts and give her all she asks? Not charity, but a fair equivalent for her work." End quote. The Saturday Morning Club was started in Hartford by Lucy Perkins and James T. Fields in 1876. The original was founded in Boston in 1871 by Julia Ward Howe. The club was meant for young ladies between the ages of 16 and 20 who met weekly for insightful cultural discussions. A guest speaker would present a lecture. Speakers included Bret Harte and William Dean Howells, and the following Saturday the ladies would discuss it. According to Twain scholar Dr. Carrie Driscoll, Sam was dubbed the patron saint of the club and lectured 15 times between 1876 and 1891. He also revolutionized the discussion sections, encouraging the women to have loose and flowing conversations instead of being so formal. The Monday Evening Club, on the other hand, was founded by Horace Bushnell, Calvin Stowe, husband of Harriet Beecher Stowe, and J. Hammond Trumbull in the 1860s to provide members of intellectual attainment and local or national celebrity with a forum for the exchange of ideas and the exercise of intellectual curiosity. They met every 2 weeks from October to May in the homes of the 20 members in turn. The club listened to a short essay from the man assigned to perform. Discussion followed, 10 minutes per member, and refreshments were served, including a supper, or beer and liquor.
The Browning Society was organized in the late 1880s, and Livy's friends gathered weekly in the billiards room or library to hear Sam read Browning's poems. Livy, Susy, and Lily Warner were the first members, but soon other neighborhood ladies joined, as well as women from nearby towns. At the meetings, nothing but the reading was talked of.
Speaking of Browning, this portrait of Sam Clemens, painted by Dora Wheeler Keefe, daughter of Candace Wheeler, was painted here at the Hartford home on the porch. During the sitting, Sam was reading poetry of Browning, and so you can see him here holding the book. The other thing to note in this portrait is that she captured the red in his mustache. He was starting to gray, but this shows his younger age.
Other popular activities included ice skating and roller skating, sledding. The girls especially loved sledding down the hill next to their house. Clara even broke her ankle during a daring ride. Horseback riding, excursions on riverboats, and group picnics, which were the most frequent form of diversion during the warmer months. Boys and girls played in tournaments arranged by the tennis club under the presidency of Joe Twitchell, who was also the center fielder on the men's club ball team, and Sam thoroughly enjoyed watching the Hartford Dark Blues baseball team. Sam was in attendance at a Hartford Dark Blues game when something was taken from him. Shortly afterwards, he decided to place an advertisement in the Hartford Courant. On May 20th, 1875, this notice went into the paper. To the public, $205 reward. At the great baseball match on Tuesday, while I was engaged in hurrahing, a small boy walked off with an English-made brown silk umbrella belonging to me and forgot to bring it back. I will pay $5 for the return of that umbrella in good condition to my house on Farmington Avenue. I do not want the boy in an active state, but will pay $200 for his remains. Samuel L. Clemens. Although there were lots of choices to stay active, the girls especially loved putting on performances. Susy loved to put on plays for her neighbors as well as her family. She wrote a play entitled A Love Chase, which was held in the drawing room of the house along with her sisters and neighborhood friends. Sam's favorite was when his girls gathered to present scenes from Prince and the Pauper. Usually this would take place in the library in front of the conservatory. The mahogany guest suite was used as a temporary green room. They would hand out tickets, create costumes, design programs, and sometimes they allowed their papa to have a small role. Welcome to the library. Now, the most impressive thing in this room is the mantelpiece. The Clemenses purchased this from a castle in Scotland on one of their many trips, fell in love with it, and had it shipped here to the U.S. to install in their beloved Hartfordhouse. Now, you'll notice, of course, the coat of arms in the center, which did not represent their family. So they wanted to personalize it so it represented them a little bit better. Now I'm going to give you a minute to try to find the year that they moved in, 1874. It's a little tricky. Now if you look to the left of the coat of arms, you'll see a dark oval with the numbers 1 and 8 intertwined with one another. If you look directly across to the other side, you'll see 7 and 4 for 1874, the year that they move in. Another detail is located at the bottom above the fireplace. This brass piece has a quote inscribed on it. It's from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it says, "The ornament of a house is the friends who frequent it." And they liked this so much, they had it installed here.
So at bedtime, the girls, Livy and Sam, would gather here in the library, and Sam would tell them a bedtime story. Now they had a game where they used the mantelpiece and everything on it as part of this bedtime ritual. The girls would have Sam start with this painting here, the cat in the rough. And then he would have to use each and every single item on the mantelpiece in order and never duplicating himself from night to night until he finished with this painting here of Emmeline. Now this painting is original to the family. It was a birthday gift for Livy. The girls loved this game, and they were really great at catching their father when he made a mistake, skipped an item, or repeated the same story. They'd come down here and rearrange things on the mantelpiece, trying to catch him up. And every time they did, their bedtime got a little bit further, and a little bit later, and a little bit later. So the girls knew what they were doing.
Sam and Livy were dedicated philanthropists and encouraged their children to follow in their footsteps. Whether that was supporting local artists, delivering Christmas baskets for the poor, or Sam appearing on the platform to raise funds for a benevolent cause, they were active in their community.
The German-American artist Karl Gerhardt came to the Clemens' attention in 1881 when his wife, Harriet, came to the Clemens home and asked Sam to help her husband. Sam visited Gerhardt's East Hartford home. When one shown a statue of a nude female, Sam realized the model had been Harriet herself, and he was charmed by her unself-conscious innocence. The Clemenses financed Gerhardt's art education in Paris, and on his return, the sculptor received many commissions. At a 2003 auction, the museum obtained a leather-bound Gerhardt notebook. The notebook was designed by Sam Clemens during one of his bouts of trying to succeed in the business world. Sam gave it to Gerhardt on February 27, 1881. Clemens believed that the tabs on the page corners, when ripped off, would help the notebook users find their place again.
Here you will notice the work of Charles Ethan Porter, born in Hartford in 1847. Porter's outstanding work gained him admission to the prestigious National Academy of Design in New York City, the first African American to be so honored. Despite the obstacles imposed on him because of his race, Porter became an accomplished still life painter. At some point, Porter came to the attention of Sam. This may have been because of Livy's work with the Decorative Arts Society, or perhaps because of a timely word from George Griffin, the Clemens family's African-American butler. Clemens is known to have purchased at least one painting, seen on the left, by Porter, and in 1881 gave him an enthusiastic letter of introduction to another artist that Sam was already supporting in Paris, sculptor Karl Gerhardt. Susy, Clara, and Jean had a large network of support, whether that was through their loving parents, the servants that worked in their household, or their neighbors. The girls were especially dear to Sam and Livy after the loss of their firstborn and only son Langdon to diphtheria in 1872. The Clemens daughters grew up surrounded by art, culture, humor, and of course creativity. Besides their foray into various performances, whether through music, writing, or acting, they were also educated at home by Livy, as well as a neighborhood governess, who taught other children. Here you'll notice Susy's copy of Outlines of the World's History, Ancient, Medieval, and Modern. This book was purchased for her at Brown and Gross Booksellers in Hartford. It contains her penciled notes throughout. You'll notice here in the left-hand margin some of those notations. In addition to their formal education, Susy, Clara, and Jean were able to experience other cultures, languages, and people through the immense traveling they did with their family. When they were old enough, Susy and Clara each spent their freshman year at Hartford Public High School. The school was a vast Gothic structure about a mile away and still boasts its significance as the second oldest public secondary school in the nation. They were in the classical department and focused on math, science, history, and Latin. Susy often had unexcused absences and received 11 demerits during the school year. Clara, whose report card you can see here, had a similar experience but received 13 demerits in 1 month. Although they were good students, they weren't necessarily the most well-behaved.
Along with education, a love of reading was instilled in all of the girls. Therefore, books were often given as Christmas or birthday gifts. We have a few of the books given to Susy over the years, including those by Harriet Beecher Stowe, gifted directly from the author, as well as this complete set of Shakespeare given to Susy by her mother for Christmas in 1885.
There are endless amounts of anecdotes and stories of the girls growing up together in Hartford. They help give us an intimate look into the lives of the family, and many of them are endearing and humorous. For example, on December 7th, 1880, Sam remembers an incident between Susy and Clara, whom they called Bay, since Susy couldn't properly say baby, so the nickname stuck. He goes on to say, quote, Bay and Susy were given candy this morning for not having quarreled yesterday. A contract of long standing, Bay began to devour hers, but Susy hesitated a moment, then handed hers back with a suggestion that she was not fairly entitled to it. Mama said, Then what about Bay? She must have quarreled too, of course. Susy said, I don't know whether Bay felt wrong in her heart, but I didn't feel right in my heart. There seems to be a pattern of being rewarded for not quarreling. Sam goes on to note, quote, the last day of the year, 1880, for some months, Bay had been bribed to not quarrel with Susy at 3 cents a day. Conversation today. Bay, Mama, you owe me for 2 days. Mama, Bay, you have not seen Susy for 2 days. She has been sick in bed. Bay, why, Mama, don't you count that? Regrettably, those cherished Hartford years would soon come to a close. Sam was introduced to inventor James W. Page by D.H. Buell, a local jeweler in Hartford. Here, you can see a pair of topaz cufflinks that Sam purchased from him in the original box. Sam was immediately taken by Page, noting, quote, what a talker he is. He could persuade a fish to come out and take a walk with him. When he is present, I always believe him. I cannot help it. When he has gone away, all the belief evaporates. He is a most daring and majestic liar. End quote. Page is able to convince Sam to invest money in his printing machine, the Page Compositor. Samuel Clemens had a difficult time making business decisions, particularly investments. This is the Page Compositor, the only one known to be in existence. There was a second one for quite a while, but Cornell melted that down for parts in World War II. This was supposed to revolutionize the printing industry, but it never was able to. The linotype machine was the one that prevailed. This machine has over 18,000 movable parts, so pretty complicated. Sam invested tons of money, hoping it would pay back, and it never did. Instead, it contributed to the bankruptcy of his publishing company, Charles L. Webster, and they eventually had to leave the house. It was too expensive to live there any longer, and they had to go overseas. They rented it out for quite a while with the hopes that they would one day return, but the oldest daughter, Susy, died, and they thought it would be too heartbreaking to ever darken the doors of their beloved home again. We are very fortunate to work at a place that helps maintain the legacy of Samuel Clemens. We take immense pride in sharing not only his story, but those of his family and the people that worked for him. As Clara once remarked, she does not want to go to heaven. She prefers Hartford. We are also lucky to have a great partnership with the other Mark Twain sites across the country, including the Center for Mark Twain Studies. Since Hartford and Elmira meant so much to the Clemens family, we thought it fitting to end with some of the artifacts that share a connection to two of the places that meant the most to Sam.
In the top right is a doodle by Samuel Clemens. He drew this long-torn cow for writer Kate D. Riggs on February 11th, 1908, at his Doe Luncheon, a gathering of his female friends. Above his initials, he wrote, quote, "A cow is a darn hard picture to make," end quote. The cow portrait in the lower right-hand corner has also been attributed to Clemens. The donor, his grandniece, described a day that the family changed their picnic plans due to a rainstorm and instead decided to have tea with a neighboring relative. Disgruntled, Sam stayed home. When the family returned, he presented this cow to his mother-in-law, Olivia Lewis Langdon, saying that he had passed the time drawing it. By comparing Clemens's known drawing of a cow with the portrait below, and knowing that he liked a good joke, it is unlikely that he is the artist of the lower image. The portrait did hang in the Langdon home for several years, as seen in the photograph on the left. An unknown person later added a scrap below it, apparently from a letter, which reads, quote, "From the brain pan of S.L. Clemens," end quote. The oil painting by an unknown artist seen here is titled "The Rich Girl." It hung in the reception room of the Langdon Mansion in Elmira, New York, as seen in the photograph on the left. The painting is part of a pairing, and its companion is aptly named The Poor Girl, which is now owned by Elmira College. While visiting England in 1873, when the Hartfordhouse was under construction, Livy Clemens purchased one set of breakfast china for herself and another for her mother. The china she acquired had elegant hand-painted flowers decorating a black ground. Although Livy was confident her mother would admire the design, she was unsure if the set would work in an American home. The British custom at the time was to use 2 small plates, while Americans used 1 large plate. Livy fretted in a letter to her mother, quote, "Here each person uses 2 plates at breakfast, 1 hot, 1 cold. I never thought I ought to select the size. I suppose breakfast plates were the same size the world over. I know you'll be so much disappointed, and now there's nothing to do unless I order some more," end quote. Today, while we do not have the Clemens' breakfast set, we do have the set that belonged to Olivia's mother, as well as her mother's silverware, both seen here.
I'm standing in the second floor guest bedroom of the Hartford home. Today we call this the Langdon Bedroom because this is where family would stay when they came to visit the Clemenses, especially Livy's mother, who came most often. Now, the furniture in this room actually belonged to Livy's mother and was located in the Langdon's Elmira home when Sam and Livy used to visit her.
In the early 1870s, the Clemens family was traveling throughout Europe, and while there, Olivia decided to shop for a few pieces of mourning jewelry. She wrote from Edinburgh in 1873, quote, "I have not seen any jet jewelry that attracts me, but I will keep a lookout. However, I presume I shall wait, and if we go to Paris, get something in jet or onyx there. I will also look for lockets." This was worn from time to time in remembrance of her father, Jervis Langdon, who had died a few years earlier of stomach cancer.
This marble bust of Olivia Langdon Clemens is by Samuel Conkey. In the photograph, you can see it as it was displayed in the Langdon home in Elmira, New York. Today, it's a predominant feature in the drawing room of the Clemens' Hartford home. With all of these connections to Elmira in our collections, and all of the stories we know about the Clemens' lives here in Hartford, it is no wonder that after an extremely busy year of lecturing, writing, school, performances, calling on neighbors and friends, and a seemingly endless amount of dinner parties and entertaining, the family would strike out for Elmira to gain respite from the busy city, as well as give Sam a chance to actually get some work done. Mallory and I plan on doing the same during our own visit to Quarry Farm. We are so thankful for our relationship with the Center for Mark Twain Studies and look forward to a continued partnership in the future.